Welcome to this morning's Crop Hour. I'm Sarah Bowder. I'll be your host today. I'm the Forage Field Specialist here with SDSU Extension based out of the Mitchell Regional Center. And today we have a special guest with us from private industry, Jeff Jackson. And Jeff actually grew up on a family farm in northwestern Iowa. He has a bachelor's in animal science and a master's in plant science, both from SDSU. He spent a lot of time in South Dakota. He started in 2005 with Land O'Lakes as a seed district sales manager, and he represented the Croplan brand and still does. He was in East Central South Dakota at the time, and eventually he became full-time Alfalfa and Forage Specialist. So he's been really involved in the I-29 dairy expansion and continues to work with agronomists and nutritionists across the country. Today he actually lives just north of Kansas City, Missouri. So we're glad to have him, even though, you know, Jeff, you're down in Missouri, which makes us a little sad, but he still has his SDSU gear on, so that's great. So we're glad to have you today. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, please feel free to use the Q&A feature down at the bottom of your screen. You can also use the chat if you have trouble with the Q&A. Jeff will have time at the end to answer questions, and he can decide, Jeff, if you want to field questions throughout your talk as well. That is up to you, but I will help you with that. And if you have any other issues during the webinar, please send us a chat. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Jeff and appreciate you joining us today.
Well, thank you all. And let's just confirm my screen did show up again.
Yes.
Okay. Well, thank you, everybody. Jeff Jackson, your Alfalfa and Forage Specialist with Croplan by Winfield. And here I am trying to get my screens to move for me, and they're not moving. There we go. We'll get the cursor all lined up and get things going. So again, for everybody, I did go to South Dakota State University. I probably built a couple of administrative homes with all the tuition that I paid up there. Animal science degree, then went back for plant science degree. Have spent a bunch of time, as she said, I get to travel. This last week, I was in Garden City, Kansas already, and went to the Alfalfa U. So I'm continuing to educate myself as well. For anybody out there, if you haven't watched or followed or know who I am, I do quite a little bit of social media work and try to help people with different agronomic segments on there. So I'm continually posting things about alfalfa production, sorghum production, forages in general. So if anybody wants to follow along and grab some information there, that's a little bit about myself quick. So really what we're here to talk about is raising forages to feed livestock. So what's going on out there? Well, we know everybody's really trying to watch input costs today, figure out what's going on, manage their risk with, you know, higher interest rates today and the cost of all of our inputs doing what they have. Everyone's really watching our inputs right now. Interestingly enough, with the weather that we are having right now, some of this is going on again. I visited with many people the last week. Even somebody this morning in Texas, they're spending a lot of time fighting fires again. And when you have 40 to 70 mile an hour winds, what does that do for our hay supply? It's really not that good, right? So we just went through some of these things. And as I understand, the part of the world that you're in right now might have a little bit more snow again. So we're going to have cold temperatures, little snow. We're going to feed a little bit heavier. Got to keep the mega cows up in the livestock that we're feeding. And we all know what the drought monitor looks like. All of these things are going to impact our supply of stored feed or hay stocks, what we have to feed across the U.S. And we can go from too much snow to too much moisture in a real hurry. Again, all of this stuff will impact how much feed we have, how fast we're feeding it, and at the end of the day, the stocks that we have to get through the next harvest, so we have plenty of feed on hand. At some point here, well, and even maybe last week, there were a few people getting itchy to pull this thing out and get going. But realistically, one of these days, the planter's going to roll again, and it's all really about keeping feed in front of these guys. So I spend a lot of time trying to help people raise the biggest pile of high-quality feed that we can. And that's really what it's all about at the end of the day. So I spend quite a little bit of time, and I put this model together a few years ago. And with all the time that I do spend in the I-29 corridor with the dairy systems, the beef feedlot systems, there are beginning to be more of these integrated cattle barns where we have maybe pits or a manure management system. And if you look at these blocks, basically every time there's a break between an arrow, that's an opportunity for someone to make a manure application. You know, understanding that we do have the regulations and manure management to follow, but that gives you opportunities to do that manure management system between each subsequent crop, if you will, as well. So let's take a look at this. The first system that I had built is the traditional corn silage piece where you take corn silage off, maybe we put some manure out, get a fall winter cereal out there, grow it through over the winter, through the spring, get it taken off, have a manure opportunity. Maybe you have a forage sorghum or a warm season annual that comes in. Fall, again, harvest, manure opportunity, come back with your cover crop or your triticale winter annual. Again, back to spring, put some manure down and come back with a corn silage crop. So that makes a nice rotation because it gives us more crops in a 3 growing season scenario. So really nice to have multiple crops, have that diversity out there, break up some different cycles. Maybe some of you did not get a winter cereal planted, and now you're going to start in the spring as soon as this cold snap gets done and the snow melts again and we get back to the field, maybe some field work. We could start early with an oat crop. Some very, very good forage oats out there today. Get that planted as quickly as it makes sense to get that done. Again, we're going to take that off come summer, late spring, early summer, give you an opportunity for manure. Warm season annual or a forage sorghum out there, follow up in the fall with a triticale or a winter annual. Again, all these little crop rotations. Now, one of my favorite for the livestock producers out there that have the ability to go graze, maybe you had some winter cereal planted and you can graze that this spring before you go hammer your pasture before it's ready to go. When I'm doing meetings with growers sitting in the room versus virtually, I will say, okay, how many people are sitting next to their neighbor today? Because if you are, maybe you should find a new chair. We're going to talk about your neighbor for just a minute. How many people have had an overgrazed pasture? Their neighbor has an overgrazed pasture that always looks like it's been grazed too short. The weeds come on pretty quick. What can we do to give that pasture a little break to get some extra grazing? So these winter annuals make a great grazing opportunity, especially the farther south we go, because you get a little bit of an extended growing season and you have more fall growth and a little bit quicker spring growth. But I really think there's an opportunity, folks, if we can let that go out and we can graze that thing, maybe in the month of May, give the pasture some more rest, and then come back with a warm season annual in the summer after that, and also graze your warm season annual again to give that pasture a rest. It's a tough one, but it's a great opportunity to build a plan and have a system laid out where you can take advantage of multiple crops. And we have some amazing crops in our cache today to play with. And that would come right here. What are my options? Triticale, warm season annuals, oat pea mixes, cover crop mixes, barley, hybrid rye, forage beans, winter wheat. And then again, the forage sorghums and the pearl millets. And if you can't guess by looking at this picture, I'm the forage sorghum product manager for the US for Croplan, and I also am running the triticale program. So a little bit of a subliminal message there. You're going to hear a little bit about that stuff today and how to manage through some of these systems. Now, why do we need some of these alternative forages? And we showed a picture a little earlier about some different things that are happening, right? And also might go down this road. Corn and corn silage is just getting too expensive to feed. I don't know how many times I've talked to growers in the last number of years, and they would say, Jeff, we just need to maybe find another option for some of these acres, because when I look at that high value corn silage pile there, at times I don't need that much energy from all the corn that's in it. And it's kind of an expensive crop to put in. So therefore it makes it a little more expensive to feed. So what else can I grow? Maybe you need an emergency forage situation. Again, some of those days where you have these deathly cold temperatures, you're feeding heavy, tough winter. Maybe we get to a point where there's a few acres that are too wet to plant in the spring to corn right away. There's always a potential that we have a weak alfalfa stand or a winter killed alfalfa, or even maybe a winter cereal grain field that failed that we were planning to graze. Now we need some more feed. How many people have ever lost a pasture? Whether the pasture was rented by a different individual, maybe it got turned into a row crop situation. The matter is you need feed as soon as possible because we're going to be short right away in the spring. It happens. Then we get to point number 3, too many cows. I can't tell you how people really giggle about this when I say, okay, gentlemen, how many of you have told your wife, don't worry, honey, I'm not taking the trailer today. I'm just going to go down to the livestock auction. I just want to watch for a bit. It's a great day to go spend down there watching cows. And then they come home and need to haul 2 trailer loads because it was such a great deal. Just couldn't resist today. Now we have too many miles, not enough feed to get through. So those things happen too. And then there's these other pieces. We're talking a lot today about regenerative agriculture, having a live root in the system 365 days a year. So we have that symbiotic relationship between the roots and the microbiology. So when you're looking at soil health, cover crops, covers that you can utilize as feed, there are a lot of objectives out there that we can also utilize some of these newer or different crops that you might not be used to. I should say different. Most of these aren't new by any stretch, but we're learning how to utilize them more efficiently and effectively. So this whole discussion about sorghum, why would we consider a sorghum crop? First of all, ladies and gentlemen, as we go through some of these drier cycles, and if they continue to hang on and be hotter and drier in different areas, simply we have less input costs from a seed, a water, and a fertilizer standpoint. The great thing about sorghums is when we have some of these areas that, again, that you might have irrigation. I get to talk to different parts of the country where irrigation water is a big deal. And when we have a crop that will use somewhere between 30 to 40% less water to grow that same ton of feed, it makes a difference. And they can allocate resources in different areas. Maybe put sorghum on one pivot, reduce that water use, and shift that water allocation to an alfalfa crop or a corn silage crop on an adjacent piece of ground. So some of these things make a big difference. And without knowing the demographics of who it all will be on here today, we're going to cover some of that just in case so we all understand as well. Excellent source of energy and digestible fiber. So one thing that there's some of these older myths. I get into groups where I will ask people, how many currently today plant sorghum? You might see a few hands. How many people remember sorghum on the farm as a kid? Might see a few more hands. How many people have had their grandparents talk about raising sorghum, quote unquote, back in the day? And there are a lot of people that might raise their hands. And then you say, well, why are we not raising it today? And we might get a comment about, well, you know, it just really isn't that great a quality. It's hard to grow. It lodges and falls down. Well, I want to tell you folks that we've changed a lot in the sorghum industry today. We have very, very digestible products. We have made a great strive to get the standability better. The management tactics are a lot better. So now we don't have to worry about some of those older things like that. So again, a great source of digestible energy for gain and milk production. Yield and quality similar to corn, or even better on those tough marginal acres. And here's another one of those comments. How many folks out there have again, one of those neighbors that continues to plant corn on an acre that fails, whether it's a sandy piece of ground, really coarse soil, depending on who's on the call today, maybe it's an eroded old clay knob, just no organic matter, no topsoil left, and that corn burns up and is a disaster every time you try to grow a crop there, but they continue to do it. So I keep threatening that I'm going to get a bumper sticker made someday that says, friends don't let friends plant crappy corn, plant sorghum. Because on those acres where you have a lot of stress, maybe some odd soil types, sorghum will handle those very, very well and be efficient and cheaper to produce. Now, I put some numbers together. So these are going to change daily for everybody on the call from region to region, but this is a dryland scenario. I have silage corn at $350 a bag and forage sorghum at $180 a bag. And that is a fully treated bag of sorghum with Concept Cruiser, ready to go with systemic insecticide. So it's as good as it's going to get. And that 350 would be probably a Smart Stack corn. So when I put this together, the difference is, folks, just on input costs alone, between fertilizer, seed costs, and a few herbicide pieces, it's literally about $280 an acre difference for input cost in this scenario. Again, as you put your own balance sheets together and your own spreadsheet to figure cost, it could be different for you depending on how you do it, some of those management tactics, but literally $250 to $280 a difference just to put the crop in the ground. Now, my other point is, if we're on one of those acres that maybe is doing 200 bushel corn, 150 to 200 bushel corn, and we're getting 20 ton of silage. We can easily get 20 ton of silage from sorghum on that same acre next to it. And I remember very vividly in 2017, Puckwana, South Dakota, we had some plots out there where, if I'm not mistaken, about the 24th of July, the corn had been swathed and baled because it was a crop destruct situation. It was just not going to make it. Directly next to that, row to row, same piece of dirt, the forage sorghum planted there caught a little snip of rain the first part of August, and it produced 17 ton of silage at 65% moisture. So the drought tolerance, the ability for that plant to get started and just kind of wait and hang on is kind of a big deal. So you could literally produce 20 ton on the same acre and have $250 less in input cost. So some of these alternative forages that maybe you haven't experienced or used before could be a very, very good tool, especially on an acre where we know we're going to grow feed that might not be the best piece of dirt for corn production and grain production. So then I'm going to throw in here why triticale. And so a few of the things about triticale itself, I'm really excited about that crop because of the fact that it performs very well on all these marginal soil types. It is very, very drought tolerant. So when we get short on moisture, it's going to hold on and produce some good yields. Very high yielder, very good quality, and it's going to maintain quality a little bit better than some of the older rye products as we get. It gives you a better window to harvest and maintain quality. We know some of these rye crops, when they get about ready to go in that soft dough stage, it feels like you've got 36 hours to get it right. And you can be wrong and have a really mature crop that doesn't pack well, doesn't feed well. So some of those pieces we want to look at why this might be really good. Disease tolerance is very, very good. Very hardy crop that we don't have to worry much about that. Oh, and by the way, we talked a little bit about grazing as well earlier. So we have a healthier crop. It's going to help compete with weeds very well. Going to help with the disease tolerance and some cold tolerance. So for grazing, again, a very good crop. Now, the other piece about this is this deeper fibrous root system. So it has a deeper root system than most of the rye today. So if you're going to scavenge and recycle nutrients, find some water, and if you are at all looking into the carbon sequestration programs or want to be a steward of that as well, you can store some deeper carbon with a deeper root system. So there are a lot of these neat little pieces in there. And I'm going to tell you right now, you don't need to ask me about the carbon sequestration and all the cycle because I am not an expert on carbon. We're going to talk about feed. That's the part that we don't harvest for myself. So we're going to let that go in the questions section. But just so you know, these are some of the things that we think about when we look at some of these newer products in the industry. Now, I wanted to show this slide because it's some yield information before the next one comes up. This was some plot information taken from Indiana. So again, quite a ways east, but it gives you a feel for how high a yield we can get with some of these pieces. So when you consider that a fall planted triticale harvested in May could produce 6.5, almost 7 tons of dry matter, that's a big day. And you still got almost 9.5% crude protein and some very, very good fiber digestibility. So interestingly enough, lots of tonnage there. So when people are looking at some of these crops, there's a lot of hope there for getting something in there. Now I want to point something else about this particular sheet. The variety that's on here is facultative. So this is a variety that could be planted in the fall, so you can have winter growth. And if you miss that window, it can also be planted in the spring. Facultative, it does not need to go through vernalization to tiller and take off in the spring. So it can be early spring planted or fall planted. Now, the yields will dictate from that. Oh, and you can see right here, spring planted trial versus a fall planted trial right on the same sheet. So about half, maybe a little less than half the yield, but you still have the potential if you're short on forages to plant something in the spring. The other thing about this is it says awnless or smooth. So if you are taking this crop out towards the soft dough stage and you're letting the heads develop, you will not have the spikelets or the awns on those heads. And for some reason, if something happens and you miss the harvest window and it gets a little too mature, or somebody wants to do dry hay that they can bale dry, then you will not have those awns. Why is that a big deal? Those hard, sharp awns can cause mouth problems, mouth sores, abscesses, all those kind of pieces. I did a meeting, talked about this in front of I had a lady in the front row that was a vet, a large animal vet, and she appeared like she might have about 50 years of experience under her belt. And when I talked about this, she got really excited and was happy that there's something like that to share. So awnless and facultative is a neat opportunity to get a crop planted either in the fall or the spring. Now, the reason I had that tonnage on there is because I wanted to show this again. If you could take 20 ton of triticale, which probably not going to happen for most people on the call today, but it's out there. 7 ton of dry matter, 20 ton of wet feed, and you pair that with 20 ton of forage sorghum on the same acre in the same year as a double crop, you have the potential to raise 30 to 40 ton of silage on 1 acre, with opportunities to get manure and fertility in there as well. So a neat piece. And you might only get 20 to 30 ton out of that corn silage. Now you can get some other cereal grains to pair with corn silage. I get it. Fun example though, to show that you could raise a lot of feed in a low cost system with maybe a sorghum and a winter cereal grain at the same time. So interesting piece. Now I wanted to go through a breakdown of some of these components in this whole forage sorghum world, because sometimes people get a little bit confused about what they need, what they're asking for, how it's going to be planted and or managed. So a forage sorghum, generally we call those single cut silage type varieties. They're going to be cut one time. They have a little slower regrowth if they did get cut or grazed. If you have an emergency, I'm not going to tell you that you can't go take them for a cutting of hay or some baleage or some silage early. They do have the potential to regrow. It's just not as fast as some of the other crosses in the industry. Generally planted in a 15 to 30 inch row, somewhere in there, with a corn planter and sorghum discs. That is the best way to plant forage sorghum, single cut material to make silage. many options available in the industry today as far as traits and types. Generally, the planting rate is going to be somewhere between 4 and 8 pounds. Some of you might say, well, we plant 10 or we plant 12. I would question you that we should talk about that. 4 to 8 pounds is going to be a very good rate to use. Partly depends on soils and the variety that you choose, but anything in that range should be very acceptable. 30-inch row, 1.5 inches deep, generally single cut sorghum silage. The second category would be the sorghum by sedan grasses. They get called hay grazers a lot because we can graze them and get good regrowth. We can hay them multiple times and get great regrowth. You could graze it once, hay it later. You could hay it first, graze it later. Some of these acres get planted early. You might have an opportunity to harvest it 3 times, depending on what your fall sequence looks like. If you're going to use it for a stored grazing crop, or if you're going to plant another annual crop, you might need to get it off quicker and only get 2 harvest opportunities. But literally, there's potential for people to take 3 harvests from a really good managed sorghum by sedan grass crop. In these crops, we are going to usually plant somewhere between 20 and about 30 pounds. Again, depending on where you're at, the moisture availability, the product that you're trying to plant. And I would also suggest that if you have people that you've talked to and or are questioning the planting rates of a sorghum by sedan grass, I get people that will talk and ask me questions about planting 50 pounds, 75 pounds, 100 pounds. I think there's a really good discussion behind that someday. If you all have those questions, you could get a hold of one of us or even Sarah as a forage expert as well. And we can talk about the planting rates and why that some of the older, more traditional varieties that don't have the quality and some of the newer traits in them, you might need to think you need to plant that high, but I would challenge it. So we want to watch planting rates. In the sorghum sedan grass world, we really don't have maturities, but we do have varieties that will try to go reproductive or put heads on at different times. So there are varieties that will be 50 days after your emergence, 65 days after emergence. There are products that will put a head on 75 days after emergence, 85 days after emergence, and then there are other products that go into the photoperiod sensitive category, and we'll talk about that here in a few minutes as well. But photoperiod sensitive basically is they won't put a head on until we get probably to about mid-September, and then they'll try to go reproductive. So the reason I have those numbers in here, let's say this. If you're planning to plant a sorghum sedan grass, and you're not really sure how you're going to manage it, you might let it go get really big and put down to make silage or do baleage in a bale. It probably doesn't make sense to plant something that's going to put a head on at 50 days when you have about 90 to 100 days of growing season, unless you're going to cut it twice or use it as a grazing and cutting management tool. Then it makes perfect sense. But if you're going to let something go and get longer, as soon as that head comes out, the fiber digestibility goes down, the crude protein goes down, your forage quality falls to pieces. So you might as well pick a different type and make sure you get that reference in there about when it's going to put a head on versus in relative relationship to when it was emerged or planted. So I hope that makes sense to everybody, but that's a neat tool. A little piece of information that's actually a tool in the toolbox so you make the right decision on what types of products to pick. Now, sedan grasses are very fine. They are finer stemmed than a sorghum sedan. They generally grow just a touch quicker. There are multiple uses on those too, and they, again, much like the sorghum sedan grass, have different timings where they might put heads out. There are some photoperiod sensitive. There are some headless products. There are also some that will, traditionally put a head on at 55 or 60 days. So again, you just want to know what you're getting, how you're going to use it, make some management decisions. These are smaller seeded, so you plant less pounds to the acre. This one's listed at 15. So, a sorghum sedan grass might be 15,000 seeds per pound. This is going to be closer to 40,000 seeds per pound. Then you're going to go to this category called pearl millets. Those are they generally between 60 and 80,000 seeds per pound. So again, we're going down to 10 or 15 pounds, depending on your environment on those guys. So pearl millets, and specifically these newer hybrid pearl millets, smaller stems, beautiful leaves, very good for dry down because you have a higher leaf to stem ratio, very prolific tillering. So when you have more tillers, there's usually more leaves. Again, very, very good for that. Most of you here won't need to worry about sugarcane aphids. That's a southern problem, but they do not have prussic acid issues. So if you want to graze something through a frost, I needed to calibrate my thoughts on that. You can graze sorghum sedan grass, you can graze forage sorghum, you can graze straight Sudan grasses, but you need to be conscious of prussic acid on those sorghum crops when you get a frost, primarily when it freezes, because you get prussic acid that can accumulate in the leaf tips and might end the life of some cows if you're not careful. The hybrid pearl millets do not have that prussic acid issue, so they can be grazed right through a frost. You don't need to go get them in and worry about some of those issues. So they make really nice hay products and very nice grazing products through a frost. Excellent regrowth, different trade options. Most of the newer hybrid pearl millets today in the industry are brachytic dwarf, which we'll talk about in a second, and a little bit shorter statured. Now, I just mentioned brachytic dwarf. So what does that mean? When you go to try to look at some of these products, somebody might talk to you about brachytic dwarf. So if you note on the picture here in the center, the leaves on the product to the left are closer together. The other product, they might be 9 inches apart. So when we talked earlier about how varieties have changed over time, the traditional product might have been 12 or 14 feet tall, and every leaf node was 9, 10, 12, 14 inches apart. So all of a sudden you have a 14-foot plant with, let's say, 11 leaves on it. Well, what we've done with the brachytic dwarf trait is we've shortened the internode spaces. So now we don't have a 14-foot plant. We're going to have about a 7-foot plant. And since the stalk is the most undigestible portion of that plant, we've also made it more digestible. So now we have a higher leaf to stem ratio, which makes it more digestible for anybody. So if you are familiar with feeding sorghum, or maybe even some corn stover or some corn silage at times, and you go to the bunk and you have to clean stuff out. Generally, what you clean out of the bunk is maybe some corn cobs and parts of the stalk. They're going to eat everything else virtually. So when we use a brachytic, we have a higher leaf to stem ratio, higher digestibility, less waste, generally better gains because leaves are more digestible, gives you better palatability and digestibility. So brachytic dwarf, shortened internodes, higher digestibility. Now, when you hear that short part, you think, well, that's going to take yield away. If you look at the picture on the right, this is a plant that has literally 3 tillers on the main stem. So now we have basically 4 6-foot plants, if you want to say it that way, but it's tillers in that same space that 1 or 2 taller 12-foot plants would have taken up. So again, we really don't give up much yield at all. We've shortened the plant. We have less lodging issues, higher fiber digestibility, higher quality product all the way through. Some of these products in the industry today also carry the BMR trait. And for those of you that are familiar with the corn world, you've heard BMR corn many, many times about being very, very high quality. So the BMR trait is also in sorghums, where we have the brown midrib is the characteristic that we visibly see. Genetically, what it does for that plant is reduces the amount of lignin that plant produces. So lignin is the undigestible portion of the fiber. It actually binds around a fiber binds around the fiber, and the microbial ruminant microbes can't break down that lignin very well. So we don't have termites in there, but the microbes can't break down that lignin very well. So then we have fiber that goes out the back end. By reducing the amount of lignin, now the ruminant microbes can break down that fiber and we get better fiber digestibility. So the BMR trait helps us. It's all about fiber digestibility and quality of feed. So now we have less waste, higher digestibility, great product. I would love to see this done again, but this is a study done in Texas 21 years ago. They were grazing stocker calves on a BMR 6 versus a conventional sorghum Sudan grass. And the difference was, if you look at the average difference in gain here, was 0.3 of a pound per head per day. At that point in time, just changing the BMR trait. I have a suspicion that if we did a Burkitic Dwarf BMR trait today and combined those two together, our digestibility would go up. The rate of gain should go up. And today on calves, holy smokes, what a difference does that make when they're priced the way they are? So gain on good quality feed will always pay for itself. Now, the company I work for, we always like to take data to insights. So I'm going to walk you through one of these fun little examples that I like to play with. If you were to come to the feed store or the seed shed, I'm going to say you're coming to the seed shed. I generally ask the group, who is the biggest tightwad in the whole group? And somebody gets pointed to or laughed at, and they go, okay, so yeah, I'm that guy. If you come into the seed shed and say, hey, just give me the cheapest bag of feed you got. I need to feed some cows. We need to make a turd. I don't want to spend a lot. Just give me some cheap stuff. We can get you a bag of seed for $40. Okay. Then I could also get you this fancy new shiny bright penny that I just talked about called a Burkitic Dwarf BMR, and it's only going to be 85 bucks. Not a big deal, right? Well, half of you just checked out and said, no, Jeff, that's twice as much. We're not interested anymore. Thank you. We'll take the cheap one and go home. Well, we're going to plant these two at about 20 pounds to the acre. And if we break that out on a cost per acre, guess what? $16 an acre versus 34. About another 30% of you just checked out and said, yeah, dude, your marketing's not that good. It's still twice as much. Sorry to tell you. Oh, but it gets better. On a 90-day cut, which I talked about earlier, folks, there are people that will let it go that far. And I did this for some people a little farther west that like to let things just go full season and get big and they take what they get at the end of the day. So this is a 90-day cutting on Burkitic Dwarf BMR sorghum Sudan grasses and a cheap conventional Sudan grass without the traits. 7.7 tons of dry matter in one cut versus 7.2. So at this point, my marketing has really failed. It's twice as much cost and it yields half a ton less. How many people are in, right? It's kind of a tough sale point, but we're going to continue anyway. We run an RFQ test. So when we measure fiber digestibility with an RFQ, all of a sudden we're 20 points better. Crude protein, 0.8 of a point difference. Maybe it's a sampling error. Maybe it's for real. It's close. We're not going to call that statistically different today for this conversation, but you get into this number that says UNDF 30 hour. So when I ask people what that means, sometimes it's hard to describe. I basically asked the scientist this, can I just boil this down to manure? And he's like, well, if you need to make it that simple, go ahead. So if we're doing manure, if we feed 100 pounds of feed, we're going to have 33 pounds of manure on the cheaper one, which is not as digestible, and 17 pounds of manure on the good one, which has got the fancy bells and whistles. So we're starting to separate. Iowa State University and Dairyland Labs came up with an equation to take feed sample information, forage sample stuff, and give us a pounds of beef produced per ton of beef, pounds of beef produced per ton of feed fed. And what this tells me is that if we're going to feed the lower value economy brand, we're going to get 42 pounds for every big round bale, basically. And some of those are going to weigh 1,500, 1,700 if you're that hero in the neighborhood that can do a 2,000-pound round bale. Good for you. Versus 97 pounds. So here we have doubled our amount of beef produced in that ton of feed fed. And then you extrapolate out times the tons per acre and you get so many pounds of beef per acre. And being a marketing person, I had to extrapolate this out and say, look, I could charge you $1,100 per bag of seed more, and the pounds of beef you raised, you would break even. Now, if you look over here to the left, I used $1.16 for my beef number because this slide is a little bit dated. Put that into today's terms. Did that expensive bag of seed just make you a whole wallet full of cash? Absolutely. So don't be fooled at the cost of a bag of seed when you go to buy something or go make some decisions. Now, here's the other thing. Most of the people that I talk to that buy this conventional bag of seed will tell me they plant 50 pounds, 75 pounds, 100 pounds. If you're planting 50 pounds to the acre, you got $40 an acre in seed cost. And if you're planting 25 pounds of the good one, you got $42.50. So it's $2.50 an acre more, $2.50 an acre, folks, to get that kind of difference in performance. Just remember. And the guys that are feeding round bales of sorghum sudan grass hay, you'll move that bale feeder on the cheap stuff quite frequently. And the Brickadic Dwarf BMR, I'm guessing it's going to be half as many times, maybe a third, and maybe you won't have to move it at all. The guys doing baleage that are wrapped wet hay, they pretty well eat that thing right to the dirt. So keep some of that in mind. Quality differences in the industry today do exist. It makes a difference. You just have to ask some questions and know what you're getting. Okay, so we got some things dropping in there. We'll move on to the next slide quick. We do have some really good feed information available in the industry today on some of these newer varieties, how they test. I've got a remit information on this, and this example, if anybody wants to see it later, I've got the 90-day cut on top with TDN. I have also at that same location, I did 2 cuts, a 45-day cut, and then the 45-day regrowth. So I basically took 3 samples in that plot. There's some pretty good in there for some people to look at. One more difference that we have in the forage industry is this photoperiod sensitive thing. And if you're in the game to plant these sorghum sudan grasses for feed one way or the other, this is one of those products that you can see in the background. That's about 80 days worth of growth in the background and about 40 days worth of growth on the front side of this plot where it had been cut twice. It will continue to put new leaves out the top of that plant until you get less than 12 hours and 20 minutes of daylight. So hence the word photoperiod sensitive. Now it will start to trigger heads to develop and will try to go reproductive. And for most, I would say it's going to be somewhere about the 14th or 15th of September. If you look at the chart when you guys might go reproductive on that product. So with that being said, we're going to have a couple more slides here to talk about some forage quality, a couple more options. If you're looking at good tons, but have the best fiber digestibility and crude protein, folks, I would suggest cutting literally into these grass crops. Could be winter wheat, triticale, rye, barley, your sorghum crops. If you can catch it in that vegetative state, or as the flag leaf comes out and the head's just in the boot, that's going to be your best opportunity for quality combination with decent tons. When you let that thing get out and you're going soft dough, your crude protein is probably going to go from the teens down to 6, 7, 8, maybe 9 at best. So your crude protein is going to drop. You're going to gain a little bit of energy in the starch, which in my mind doesn't pay for the protein loss, and the fiber digestibility is going to go down. So if you just need a big pile of fiber for dry cows or raising heifers or putting frame on something, yeah, fiber and less energy is okay. So you need to gauge your management and harvest on what your product at the end of the day needs to look like. Grazing these things is phenomenal. I could probably talk for 30 minutes just on grazing, but if you have an opportunity to graze some of these crops, and I would suggest rotational grazing versus just turning 30 cows out into a whole quarter. If you could give them just so much at a time, and I'm not telling you you need to go crazy and be the person that goes and moves a hot wire every 12 hours. This example in front of you here, we did on a 7-day rotation, which was quite painless, let's just say, because the people involved were working at full-time jobs, and it made it easy to do it on a Saturday or a Sunday, Friday evening, whichever way worked around, and get things rotated and have really good rotation opportunities. We're going to see some of these things happening shortly where we have these sacrifice yards, pastures, close-up pens, and hopefully you guys don't end up like this here shortly. It kind of a fun picture. But my point is, we have a tremendous number of people that are going out and taking sorghum Sudan grass in these sacrifice pastures and no-tilling in for some winter grazing, maybe some bedding to lay on, or late summer grazing, but don't just leave weeds grow. You can plant something there and have a really good crop. So that's why I put that in here. We have some people that have taken some cool season grasses that have been grazed hard and burnt out, basically, and planted sorghum Sudan grass in those in the first part of June. You just need enough moisture to get things germinated. This is actually an interesting scenario where it's paddock system, university scenario where we planted sorghum Sudan grass in, it's actually fescue. But everybody knows grad students. We had some grad students and interns go clip samples of the sorghum Sudan grass at 6 inches of cutting height. And in this picture that you can see to the right, actually the two right photos, there were 4.3 tons of dry matter over the top of a cool season grass that was basically done for the summer. So some notes and calculations. I'm just giving you a quick couple opportunities of how to fill in. You get an alfalfa crop, you take the first cutting off and it looks like it's kind of thin and you want to make sure you get some more tonnage for the rest of the season. Again, if you can have moisture available, we've had some very good success taking a sorghum Sudan grass, no-tilling it into an alfalfa stand and raising the tonnage of that field for the rest of the season without starting over. Options, multiple ways to do things. Also had guys take pearl millet after first cut, burn the alfalfa down. I'm going to tell you right now, I do not believe pearl millet has the vigor to keep up with another growing crop. So we want to go basically get the alfalfa dead unless it's really, really, really thin. Come back, pearl millet, utilize the nitrogen credits, grow a great 1, 2, maybe even 3 harvests of really good material. Got some quality information, folks. We're getting down to the end of my hour. So I want you to know that if anybody has any questions, you can follow up. We can talk about prussic acid, nitrate poisoning. That's a big topic, maybe a whole nother segment someday, Sarah, that we can follow up with nitrates, how to manage that through some of these grass crops. Again, it's all about building a system, maybe getting some manure out, having some high tonnage, high quality crops out there for everybody. And you have the end of my moment. So we have time for questions. We can go. I think I can see the chat here. And there is really nothing in there other than the instructions. So with that, I'm going to pull my slides down. And if anybody has anything that they want to ask, or you guys have some comments, go for it.
Yeah, if you have questions for Jeff, feel free to put them in the Q&A or the chat as we wait. Thanks, Jeff. That was really, really well encompassing of multiple alternative forages. So, and when we say alternative, I always get a kick out of that phrase because people recognize it, but they really don't need to be alternative. I always say sorghum could be our plan A. We use it as our plan B all the time, but it could be plan A. And that's kind of what you talked about.
It's amazing. I have joked about this for a number of years and basically used the comment that some of these sorghums are probably the best kept secret we have in feeding cattle.
Yeah.
And folks, I'm not telling you that growing corn's wrong by all means. There's a place for it. And when you look at the economics of it, and I think people are scared sometimes because that's not what they do. We're really good at planting corn, Jeff. We know how to grow corn. And just take it. I'm not telling anybody to go take the whole farm either. Take a few acres. Let's try some. Take some advice, figure out how to manage it, figure out how to harvest it, and then work it into the program a little bit bigger. I mean, we have very large producers in South Dakota that plant hundreds and hundreds of acres of sorghum already. It's doable.
Yep,
South Dakota,
absolutely.
Northwest Iowa, we're growing into larger areas now. Minnesota, there's beginning more utilization of these crops to fit the right feed profile, fit the right acre. It's just a lot of rights. There's a lot of right things.
That's right. Jeff, Jim has a question. Would the first
Yes.
rotation on your slide work well for large dairy operations?
The first, yes, that's actually what that thing was built for, Jim, was for a large dairy. And something that I didn't mention as we talked about this, how many people, okay, Sarah, in Minnehaha County,
Mhm.
what in the past, what has corn rootworm done? I called that like the corn rootworm Bermuda Triangle.
Yeah.
Literally, folks. Forage sorghum is not a host for corn rootworm. Can it help break the cycle? Yeah, we have these diapause things going on as well. So when you get into the agronomics of it, it's not a host for tar spot. It's not a host for corn rootworm. Most of those troublesome insects and diseases, we can help break that cycle. So Jim, yes, I think it's a tremendous opportunity to rotate in a forage sorghum and some of these other winter cereals in those. It fits like a hand in a glove, especially these guys that still have their dry cows and heifers on farm. So if they don't quite get the quality or the energy they want, I mean, I've got guys feeding this Burkitic Dorf BMR sorghum to lactating cows, no question. But if you can take
Can
distiller's grain and put that with a sorghum sedan or a forage sorghum, I think you can make the perfect TMR right there and not have to raise corn. That's my opinion.
can you repeat what the rotation was, Jeff, just for anyone that doesn't remember?
I tell you what, yes, I can do that. I was just going to say maybe I try to go put it back up, but the
Sure.
rotation would have been take corn silage off, put some manure down. In the fall, plant your winter cereal, grow that over the winter. Let's say June 1st, you're going to take that winter cereal off, plant some manure again, or plant some manure, put manure out if you can. Plant your forage sorghum or warm season annual. Grow that for the winter. Grow that for the warm season of the year. Take it off in September. Get some more manure, groundwork done. Go back to your winter forage again, and then maybe you come back to corn silage again on year 3. So corn silage first year, sorghum sudan grass the second year, back to corn silage. It's going to help break up that window. Or maybe you go warm season annual 2 years to break up the corn rootworm issue on a corn on corn on corn scenario. And then on the 4th year, you come back to corn silage. But
And your cool season cereals helping with your pests.
and
So
the
it's
cool
a
season cereals are in there. They keep the ground covered. The wind doesn't blow your black dirt into the neighbor where we have snert all winter long. All those kind of things. And oh, by the way, if you're renting ground, it really looks pretty. So the landlord thinks it looks nice. I
always
mean,
a good thought.
I've had people tell me that's one of the first reasons they planted fall cereals because their intention was to terminate and plant corn silage, but the neighbors liked it and it made the community feel good.
Yeah. There's always a sociology aspect.
Uh-huh.
Jim makes the comment, if you just go northwest of Brookings near the bigger dairies there, you can see some rootworm damage up in that area. And yes, I have definitely seen that too, Jim. He also asks
For
Jeff,
sure.
and this is a great question, how do we convince the dairy nutritionists that this can work? And breaking into that network can definitely be difficult. So that's a good question, Jim. I'm glad you're asking Jeff and not me.
They literally have to here's the problematic piece. most of the computer systems that people use to balance rations probably don't give sorghum the right values. So they're probably going to have to talk to somebody that's already done it, touched it, felt it, feeding it, experienced it. There are some very good nutrition people out there that have experience feeding forage sorghum, and once they get it, it's really pretty cool, and they will help support it. But to your point, Jim, getting the nutritionist on your side is far harder than getting the rest of the dairy management team on your side. Yes. How do we do it? I guess we provide them with some samples and say, look at how good it really can be. We have a lot of fiber, but it's a very digestible, effective fiber, not like some of these other crops. It's just short on energy. That's the only thing we got to fix.
I think it's a great question. And I would add, Jim, that a lot of times, and I think you know this too, but a lot of times if you can show a dairy that's doing it successfully, I mean, that goes a long ways, I think, with other producers. Now, the nutritionist, obviously, you need the nutritionist on board.
And the other
So that,
question he just posted here would be, where do we find data that we can use for some of
yes,
these things? Sarah, I'm guessing between you and I, because you've obviously, I think you've taken some quality data at Beersford on a bunch of sorghum as well, right?
we have some. We're
Right.
doing
So
a variety
between,
trial. So
yeah, so between the two of us, we should be able to come up with a pretty good cache. So I have 6 locations across the upper Midwest, being Nebraska, South Dakota, and Kansas, Great Plains. I have 6 replicated trial locations. I can get a pretty good set of data for 10 years. Just utilize the contact information that we can provide you and find me later.
yeah, there is some data out there. But you know that, like you said, the ground truthing, giving them local data really does help
Yeah.
typically.
So
Those are great questions.
I would have South Dakota, Minnesota, Northwest Iowa data for anybody on the call that needs it.
Yes, and I would have more yield data than anything, but we're working towards the quality side. It's just really expensive to do a lot of quality data, so it
Oh
takes a
yeah,
long time to build up the
correct.
funding. I will add, while we're doing Q&A, we do have another question here, Jeff. There is a CCA code up. If you need that, you can scan it. And also Kira is going to launch a poll. If you can just fill out, it's just a 2-question poll, just gives us an idea of what topics you'd like to hear from. Jim is saying that this will be important because there's a lot, there's 20,000 with another 40,000 coming in dairy operations in the area. So
Yep,
definitely an important discussion.
I agree 100%.
Are there any other questions or comments? The webinar setting protects us from a lot of the security issues, but it makes it hard sometimes to talk with our participants. So don't be shy if you want to put something in the chat or in the Q&A,
Right.
or you can always contact Jeff as well. Jeff, if you want to mention your email, maybe, if that's how you prefer to be contacted.
Oh, sure, absolutely. So my email is J for Jeff, C for Charlie, Jackson. So JC Jackson at landolakes.com, all one word. So JC Jackson at landolakes.com. And Sarah and I coordinate projects and stuff together all the time. So if you get a hold of her and she needs to get a hold of me, we'll make this all happen.
Yep, Jeff's a great resource, and we really appreciate you coming on
Yep.
the crop hour webinar today, Jeff. We're winding down at the end, and I think we have well, I'm biased, but some of the best topics and speakers at the end here. So we had a good crowd today, and thank you all for coming. You will be able to find a recording of this webinar shortly, in just a few days, as soon as our tech staff is able to edit and post it at the same place that you signed up for the webinar. You can find those recordings. So thank you for joining us today. Have a great day, and hopefully we'll see you tomorrow for Dr. Dan Undersander, who's going to be talking about legumes in rotations. So do check that out if you have a chance. Thanks, Jeff.
Perfect. Y'all have a great day.